Woman laughs at veteran's rundown car, then he hands her a note. Madison Sinclair's life was a masterpiece of luxury and comfort, built on years of hard work and keen decisions that positioned her at the top of Boston's social and professional ladder. She was 35 years old, and every inch of her polished appearance screamed success. Her tailored navy blue suit fit perfectly, accentuating the tone of her fit frame. Her shoes were designer, the finest leather, their polished surface reflecting the bright morning sun. Her hair, a rich shade of chestnut, was styled to perfection in an elegant updo, revealing the delicate gold earrings that swayed ever so slightly with each movement. Before we can continue, if you support veterans, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. She lived in a sleek, modern condo with an unparalleled view of the city skyline. Every piece of furniture was handpicked, from the minimalist Scandinavian coffee table to the plush, velvety couch that complemented the sophisticated ambience of the room. The walls of her apartment were adorned with abstract paintings from local artists, adding a personal touch to the otherwise perfectly curated space. In the evenings, the lights of the city twinkled below her as she sipped on a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, a rare indulgence she considered a reward after long hours of work. Madison worked as a senior consultant at one of the top financial firms in the country. Her desk, situated in a corner office overlooking the city, was meticulously organized. On the surface, it reflected her professional expertise, papers neatly stacked, her laptop arranged at the exact angle for comfort and efficiency. A crystal vase sat in the middle of the desk, holding fresh flowers every week, a symbol of both elegance and the life she had built. Her phone was always within reach, and it was never idle. Whether she was reviewing investment portfolios, meeting with clients, or strategizing for the next big deal, Madison's life was a constant flurry of movement. Her colleagues admired her professionalism, her poise, and her ability to close deals that seemed almost impossible. They respected her intellect, and though some might have envied her success, Madison didn't seem to mind. She was indifferent to what people thought of her, more focused on her goals than anything else. She had a reputation for being efficient, effective, and above all, incredibly driven. To the outside world, Madison was the epitome of success. Even her social life was meticulously planned. Dinner parties, galas, charity auctions, these were the kinds of events that filled her calendar. At each event, she was the picture of sophistication. People gravitated toward her. She was the life of the party, always well-spoken and engaging, knowing exactly what to say to make others feel important. Yet, underneath all the glitz and glamour, there was a palpable sense of loneliness that Madison tried, albeit unsuccessfully, to ignore. Her relationships felt superficial. People came and went, but the emptiness remained. Madison had dated, of course. There were a few serious relationships in her past, each one ending when the other party failed to match her ambition, or perhaps when she realized that the person she was with had more interest in her wealth and status than in who she truly was. She had learned to bury her emotional needs beneath layers of work and appearances. She was too busy to focus on personal connections anyway, or so she told herself. The career, the parties, the luxurious vacations, all of it was enough to fill the void, or at least, she thought it was. One morning, as she prepared for a busy day of meetings, Madison's assistant, Olivia, buzzed her office with an urgent message. "Madison, there's a veteran charity event happening at the convention center this weekend. Would you be interested in attending? It's a high-profile event, and they're expecting some major donors." The offer felt familiar, another high society event, another opportunity to rub elbows with influential people. Madison didn't even need to check her calendar. "Of course I'll go," she responded casually, her mind already drifting to the next task at hand. She hadn't thought much about the event, nor had she given much consideration to the cause. Veterans? They seemed far removed from her everyday life. She had heard about their struggles, of course, seen the commercials on TV, but it never seemed real to her. She was detached from it in the same way she was detached from the realities of most things outside her immediate world. That evening, as Madison finished up a dinner at a posh restaurant in the financial district, she came across a news segment on the television. The story was about veterans who had been left to fend for themselves after returning from war. The reporter interviewed several veterans living in shelters, struggling to find work or adjust to life outside the military. The interviewees spoke about the horrors of war, the trauma they carried, and the difficulty of reintegrating into a society that didn't seem to care. Madison found herself staring at the screen, her eyes momentarily fixed on one man in particular, a veteran who spoke about the challenges of finding housing. He was young, maybe in his early 30s, with a face marked by hardship. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped as he talked about the difficulties of getting by. She felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name, an emotion she hadn't expected. Compassion, maybe, or perhaps guilt. Her mind wandered to her own lifestyle. She lived in a penthouse, in a city where homelessness and poverty seemed like distant concepts. How often had she passed by people living on the streets without a second glance? How many times had she driven by a veteran in need of support and dismissed them as just another unfortunate person? She wasn't proud of it, but she wasn't sure what she could do to help either. The problem seemed so far beyond her, something that would require more than just a check. That night, Madison couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, the cool sheets tangled around her legs as she thought about the veteran's story. She had the ability to help, to make a difference. But where would she even begin? She wasn't sure. The thought of giving away a portion of her wealth seemed foreign to her. Sure, she donated to charity, but those were large-scale events that didn't require her to get personally involved. Donations came with tax benefits, with social recognition. What could she possibly do to make an actual difference? As the hours passed, her thoughts began to circle back to the charity event she had committed to attending. It felt like the right thing to do, but it also felt hollow. Madison was starting to realize something. She had built a life of comfort around herself, but the more she reflected on it, the more she saw how disconnected she had become from the reality of the world around her. The more she tried to convince herself that her donations were enough, the more she felt like they weren't. And as she lay there in the silence, Madison felt the weight of her own complacency. She didn't know exactly what she could do, but she knew she had to do something. As the weeks passed, Madison's initial discomfort began to evolve into a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction. At first, the feeling was subtle, just a faint stirring in the back of her mind that she could easily dismiss with another busy day at the office, a night out with friends, or a weekend getaway. But the more time she spent reflecting on the veteran she had seen on the news, the more that sense of dissatisfaction began to grow. It wasn't just that she had witnessed the suffering of others, it was that she had never truly experienced it herself. Madison had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to control her own destiny. She had built her life from the ground up, working tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder and carve out a niche for herself in a world dominated by powerful, often ruthless, individuals. But beneath the surface of her achievements, Madison couldn't help but wonder, was this really all there was? Was she living the life she was meant to live, or had she simply been following the path of least resistance, accumulating wealth and prestige along the way? Her reflection grew deeper as she prepared for the veteran charity event that she had agreed to attend. It was held at a luxury venue on the outskirts of Boston, a sprawling estate that seemed almost too grand for its own good. The marble columns and grand chandeliers seemed to mock the very cause they were meant to support. As Madison arrived, the sight of the well-dressed crowd, sipping champagne and discussing their latest investments, only made her feel more detached from the cause she had agreed to support. Everyone was there to be seen, to make an appearance, to add another donation to their portfolio of charitable endeavors. Madison's usual confidence faltered as she took in the scene. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but it certainly wasn't this display of ostentation. As she mingled with the other guests, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation about hedge funds, new luxury cars, and the latest designer fashions. It was a stark contrast to the struggles of the veterans she had seen on the news. She felt like an outsider in a world that, on the surface, was so familiar to her, yet felt so foreign in its emptiness. As she sipped her wine, Madison's gaze drifted toward the stage at the front of the room, where the evening speeches were about to begin. The organizers introduced a few high-profile speakers, and the audience clapped politely, their attention momentarily fixed on the podium. But Madison couldn't focus. Her mind kept returning to the image of the young veteran she had seen on television, the man with the hollow eyes, speaking about his struggles in a way that had made her heart ache. She wanted to do something, anything, to make a difference. But what could she do? She was just one person, and the problem was so vast. The charity event that evening seemed to offer no answers, only more questions. She had already made her donation, of course, an amount that was considered generous by the standards of the evening. But even as she signed her check, she had known it wasn't enough. It never felt like enough. Was money all she had to offer? Couldn't she do more? The veterans, the people struggling every day to survive, weren't looking for more handouts. They needed real, tangible help. Madison knew that her wealth could make a difference, but she felt completely disconnected from the people who actually needed it. How could someone like her, living in the lap of luxury, truly understand what they were going through? That night, as Madison returned home, the weight of her thoughts only grew heavier. She had taken a cab from the event, staring out the window as the lights of Boston flashed by in a blur. The city was beautiful, but it felt so distant. Everything in her life, her career, her social circles, her luxury apartment, felt like it was built on a foundation that wasn't entirely real. There had to be more to life than just money, success, and appearances. But what was that more? She had no idea. Her mind drifted to George, the elderly man she had seen that morning in the parking lot outside her building. His car, an old, beat-up sedan, had caught her eye as she passed by. The contrast between the rickety vehicle and her sleek, shiny car was striking. It was the kind of sight that would usually make her feel superior, as if the difference in their status was a matter of fate, a consequence of the choices they had made. But this time, she didn't feel superior. Instead, she felt something else, something she wasn't used to feeling. She had been irritated at first. George's car had been in the way of her parking space, and she had made a disparaging remark to her friend over the phone about how people like him shouldn't be driving such dilapidated vehicles. But when he had handed her the note, something had shifted inside her. The note had been simple. "I used all my savings to help veterans. Please don't judge me for my car." The words had struck her more deeply than she cared to admit. Madison was not someone who easily allowed herself to be affected by other people's emotions, but there was something about George's humble sacrifice that made her stop and think. Here was a man, clearly struggling, yet willing to give everything he had to help others. It was the kind of selflessness she had never truly experienced in her own life. She had donated to charity, yes, but it had always felt like a transaction, something to check off a list or to gain social favor. She had never given in a way that hurt, in a way that required real sacrifice. The more she thought about it, the more her mind began to swirl with questions. What had driven George to give up his savings to help veterans? What had it felt like for him to part with something so valuable? Madison had always been careful with her money, protecting it, growing it. It was a tool to give her the life she had built. But now she wondered, could it be used to build something else? Could it be used to help others, not just through a donation or a check, but through meaningful action? She wasn't sure, but she felt compelled to find out. In the days following the event, Madison found herself researching veteran charities, reading about the organizations that worked tirelessly to support those who had served their country. The more she read, the more she realized how much she didn't know. She had assumed that organizations like these operated smoothly, that they were well-funded and had all the resources they needed. But the stories she read painted a different picture. Many veterans were living in poverty, struggling with mental health issues, and battling a system that seemed indifferent to their needs. For the first time in a long while, Madison felt a genuine desire to help. But she knew she couldn't just write a check and call it a day. This was different. She had to do something more. But what?
And how?
Her desire for change had been ignited, but now she was left with the overwhelming question of how to take the first step. The life she had built was comfortable, yes, but it had also become stifling. She had everything she could ever want, yet she had never felt so unfulfilled. Helping others, truly helping them, seemed like a way out of the emptiness that had begun to creep into her life. But the path ahead was uncertain. She had to make a choice, and she didn't yet know what that choice would be. The decision was made. Madison had taken the first steps toward a new reality, one that was far different from the polished world she had inhabited for years. The process of adaptation, however, was neither quick nor easy. Her life of luxury and privilege had created a significant divide between her and the world of those she now sought to help. Navigating this new realm of philanthropy and direct involvement was a challenging journey, filled with both subtle and obvious hurdles that tested her resolve. At first, Madison had underestimated the sheer scale of what it meant to truly make a difference. She had assumed that simply donating money, time, or resources to a cause would suffice. But she quickly realized that this kind of involvement went far beyond the checkbooks and fundraising galas she had been accustomed to. Real change wasn't just about financial contributions or high-profile events. It was about long-term commitment and a willingness to immerse oneself in the lives of the people affected. Her journey into the world of veterans assistance began with meetings and consultations with various charities. She reached out to several organizations that focused on helping veterans, some local and others with national reach. The first few meetings were formal, brief, and mostly informational. Madison found herself sitting across from directors and volunteers, many of whom had spent years or even decades working with veterans. She listened attentively, nodded when appropriate, but felt the unfamiliarity of the situation gnawing at her. These people knew the struggles of their community in a way she couldn't comprehend, and they spoke with a language, an understanding, that she hadn't developed. Madison was aware of her privilege in a way she never had been before. She had always known she was wealthy, but until now, she had never truly considered the deep divide between her world and the world of those less fortunate. The veterans she had read about were not just people with hard luck stories. They were real individuals with complex histories, rich backgrounds, and heartbreaking challenges. It was difficult to grasp the depth of what they had endured: wars fought on foreign soils, the weight of trauma, the disillusionment that followed, and the difficulty of reintegrating into a society that often seemed indifferent. Her first attempt to volunteer at a local veterans support center was a humbling experience. Madison had envisioned her involvement as something grand. Perhaps she would lead a project or host a fundraising event for the charity she had aligned herself with. Instead, she was assigned a simple task: organizing a stack of donation packages that had arrived that morning. It seemed trivial, yet it was a necessary and foundational job that contributed to the overall mission. As she folded t-shirts, sorted through care packages, and packed boxes, Madison found herself growing increasingly frustrated. The physicality of the work was unfamiliar to her. She had spent most of her adult life in boardrooms, making decisions that affected millions of dollars, yet here she was, doing something that felt almost too small, too mundane. Her mind raced with thoughts. Is this all they need? How can this really help them? But in moments of reflection, she understood. These small acts of kindness were the backbone of the greater mission, providing support and showing veterans that they were seen, valued, and appreciated. She knew that for real change to take place, she had to push past her discomfort. The veterans' issues were not just about the occasional donation or handout. They were about emotional, physical, and psychological healing. The more she immersed herself in their world, the more she realized that the road to helping them wasn't linear. There was no quick fix. What they needed were long-term solutions: accessible healthcare, mental health support, job training, housing assistance, and most importantly, a community that would accept them back with open arms, rather than pushing them aside. As the weeks went by, Madison continued her volunteer work, gradually becoming more involved in the center's day-to-day operations. She helped organize events, set up initiatives, and worked with veterans on a personal level. Some were skeptical of her at first, questioning her motives, while others seemed genuinely touched that someone like Madison, a wealthy, powerful woman, was taking the time to engage with their struggles. It was a slow process of earning trust. At times, she felt like an outsider, someone who couldn't possibly understand what these men and women had been through. Yet she remained committed. She began attending support groups where veterans shared their experiences with one another. Madison would sit quietly, absorbing their stories, feeling the weight of their pain in a way she hadn't anticipated. There was nothing glamorous about it, no applause, no media coverage. There were just people talking candidly about their lives, their losses, and their hopes for the future. Madison's personal transformation began to unfold as she listened. It wasn't a dramatic, overnight change. Rather, it was a gradual, subtle shift in her perception. The discomfort she had felt at first began to evolve into something else: empathy. She had been living in a bubble of luxury for so long that she had forgotten the harsh realities of the world. Yet with each story she heard, she started to understand that real healing couldn't be achieved through grand gestures alone. It required sustained effort, genuine connection, and the ability to meet people where they were, without judgment. As she worked more closely with the veterans, Madison began to see the nuances of their struggles. Some were dealing with PTSD, others with addiction, and many were facing deep isolation. The more she observed, the more she realized that the real battle wasn't just about physical needs. It was about rebuilding lives, restoring dignity, and offering opportunities where none had existed before. Madison began to take on more responsibility within the charity. She spearheaded an initiative to create job training programs for veterans, working with local businesses to open up opportunities for those who had served. This project was particularly close to her heart. As someone who had always prided herself on her career, Madison understood the importance of meaningful work. She believed that giving veterans the skills they needed to succeed in the workforce was a powerful way to restore their confidence and sense of purpose. But even as Madison became more involved, she still struggled with the gap between her world and theirs. She was still an outsider, albeit one who was trying her best to learn and adapt. The veterans, though appreciative of her efforts, often reminded her of the fundamental difference between their experiences and hers. Their world was one of survival, where every day was a struggle, and comfort was a luxury few of them had ever known. Madison's growing involvement with the veterans also had a profound impact on her personal life. Her relationships with friends and colleagues began to change. She no longer found herself engaging in superficial conversations about wealth and status. Instead, she sought out deeper connections, those that focused on shared values, empathy, and a desire to make a tangible difference. Some of her old friends, who had only known her for her wealth and social standing, began to pull away. They didn't understand why she was spending so much time with veterans, why she had shifted her focus from luxury and leisure to service and sacrifice. At the same time, Madison began to develop new relationships with people who shared her newfound sense of purpose. There were fellow volunteers, other philanthropists who worked quietly behind the scenes, and, most significantly, the veterans themselves. These relationships weren't always easy. There were moments of tension, awkwardness, and even resentment. But they were real, and that was something Madison had never experienced before. These relationships were built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared desire to help others. Despite her progress, there were days when Madison felt overwhelmed. The problems she was trying to address were so large, so complex, that it often seemed like she was swimming against the tide. But she continued. She kept showing up, volunteering her time, her resources, and her heart. Each day, she became more attuned to the needs of the veterans, and each day, she felt herself becoming more rooted in this world. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when Madison sat in a small, quiet room with a veteran named Mark, a man who had served in the military for over 20 years before returning home to face the challenges of reintegrating into civilian life. Mark had opened up to Madison during one of the support group sessions, sharing his struggles with addiction and PTSD. As they sat together, Madison realized just how far she had come from the woman she had been. She had shed her initial discomfort, her hesitations, and her doubts. She was no longer an outsider looking in. She was a part of this world, a world that had changed her forever. As they talked, Madison felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. She understood now what it meant to be truly connected to a cause, to a community of people who had been ignored and forgotten for too long. She was no longer just a philanthropist writing checks. She was a part of something much bigger than herself. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter filled with challenges, but also with hope, growth, and genuine connection. Madison thought she had it all figured out. After months of immersion into the world of veterans' aid and support, she finally felt like she was beginning to make a difference. She had spearheaded the job training programs, coordinated various fundraising efforts, and spent countless hours working directly with the veterans themselves. Each interaction, each initiative seemed to solidify her belief that she was on the right path. But as with any journey, there were unexpected twists along the way. The path to success, she now realized, was never as straightforward as she had hoped. The project Madison had worked so tirelessly on, a job training program that aimed to equip veterans with the skills they needed to re-enter the workforce, was beginning to show results. A handful of local businesses had agreed to partner with the charity, offering internships and entry-level positions to veterans. Some of the veterans who had participated in the program were now employed, building new lives for themselves and slowly reintegrating into society. This, she thought, was the success she had envisioned. On paper, the program appeared to be a triumph. For the first time in years, veterans who had struggled with the transition from military to civilian life were finding new purpose. They had jobs. They were rebuilding their confidence. They were starting to believe that their sacrifices had meaning again. As the program gained momentum, Madison's confidence in her abilities grew. She was finally making a tangible impact, and it felt good. The accolades, the gratitude from the veterans, and the success stories from local businesses flooded in. But as the praises poured in, something inside Madison began to stir, a gnawing feeling that she couldn't quite put her finger on. It was as though something was missing. She had everything she had aimed for, everything she had worked so hard to achieve. Yet, despite the outward success, there was a quiet emptiness beneath the surface. The more she accomplished, the more she realized that the satisfaction she had expected was fleeting. The deeper she delved into the world of charity and philanthropy, the more she understood that her initial idea of success might not have been the right one. As Madison sat in her office one evening, reviewing the reports on the veterans' employment placements and their progress in the training programs, she felt an overwhelming sense of disillusionment. Her mind raced as she thought about how much had been accomplished, how many lives had been touched, but there was something unsaid, something unaddressed in all of this. She had been focused so much on tangible achievements, on numbers, programs, and outcomes, that she had neglected the more subtle, yet perhaps more important, aspects of the process. Madison had always prided herself on being a problem solver. Whether in her business dealings or personal life, she was accustomed to taking on challenges, solving them efficiently, and moving on. But as she spent more time around the veterans, she began to realize that many of the issues they faced went beyond what could be solved with job programs or financial donations. Many of them had psychological wounds that could not be healed with a paycheck or a piece of training equipment. These invisible scars were deeper than anything she had anticipated, and she had failed to address them in her efforts to fix their lives. It was a sobering realization. She had assumed that providing practical solutions, jobs, skills, financial stability would be enough to help the veterans regain their dignity and sense of purpose. But she quickly understood that she had overlooked the need for emotional and psychological support. The veterans, despite their success in securing jobs and rebuilding their careers, still struggled with isolation, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and the haunting memories of their service. They were still hurting, and the pain they carried with them couldn't be solved by a 9-to-5 job or a few therapy sessions. Her sense of accomplishment began to fade as she understood the limitations of the project she had created. Madison had been so focused on what she thought the veterans needed, tangible, concrete solutions, that she had missed the point. What they needed wasn't just employment or financial stability, it was healing. It was community. It was the space to process their trauma and rebuild their emotional and psychological resilience. Madison took a step back, feeling the weight of this realization settle on her shoulders. She knew she had to do more. She couldn't just stop here, not when there was so much left to be done. But she also understood that her initial vision for success had been narrow, driven by a desire to fix things quickly and move on to the next challenge. Now, she recognized that the journey of helping others, especially those who had endured the kind of trauma that veterans faced, was a long and complicated process. In the weeks that followed, Madison shifted her focus. She expanded the scope of the training programs to include emotional resilience workshops, mindfulness exercises, and support groups for the veterans to talk about their experiences in a safe, judgment-free environment. It wasn't a quick fix, but Madison came to understand that real healing took time and patience. The veterans needed more than just jobs. They needed the chance to rebuild their identities, reconnect with themselves, and learn to cope with the psychological scars they carried. The changes she introduced were met with mixed reactions. Some veterans welcomed the idea of therapy and emotional support. Others were skeptical, reluctant to open up about the pain they had buried for so long. Madison knew it wasn't going to be easy to get everyone on board, but she remained committed. For every veteran who resisted, there was another who embraced the opportunity to confront their demons. Slowly, more and more veterans began to attend support groups and workshops. The walls they had built around themselves began to crumble, bit by bit. As Madison worked tirelessly to expand the reach of these emotional and psychological services, she began to see the difference it made. There were small victories, veterans who spoke for the first time about their experiences, veterans who reached out to help others, veterans who found peace in simply knowing they weren't alone. It wasn't a quick transformation, and the road ahead remained long, but for the first time, Madison felt that she was truly getting to the heart of the issue. However, even with this new direction, Madison could not escape the creeping doubt that began to arise. Despite the tangible successes of her expanded program, she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was still missing. She had given so much of herself to the cause, her time, her energy, her heart. But was it enough? Could anything truly make up for the years of pain and loss that these veterans had endured? And perhaps even more painfully, could she ever truly understand the depths of their struggles? This was the price she had to pay for what she wanted. The realization that even with all her efforts, there would always be more to do, more to fix, and more to heal, weighed heavily on her. She had wanted to fix the veterans, to solve their problems with programs and donations, but what she had discovered was that the true work of helping them wasn't about solving problems. It was about walking alongside them as they navigated their own healing journey. Madison had wanted to make a difference in a tangible way, to see immediate results, but she was learning that some things could not be rushed. The real change she had hoped for didn't come in the form of a completed project or a polished initiative. It came in the quiet moments when a veteran shared a piece of their story, or when someone found the courage to ask for help. It came in the form of connections, human connections, that allowed the veterans to feel seen, heard, and valued. And in that, Madison began to understand that success was not always measured in accomplishments or milestones. Sometimes, success was simply being present, showing up for others, and helping them find their way, no matter how long it took. Madison had achieved what she set out to do. She had created a program that helped veterans secure jobs, rebuild their lives, and find purpose after their service. At first, it seemed like an accomplishment, one that could give her the validation she had long craved. But as she grew deeper into the world of philanthropy and the realities faced by the veterans, she began to see that even her greatest successes came at a significant cost. What she once considered to be victories felt empty in the face of the emotional and psychological scars many of these men and women carried. The price of success had come in unexpected forms. On the surface, Madison's initiative had been lauded as a major achievement. The veterans who participated in the job training programs were finding employment, the veterans' families were expressing gratitude, and local businesses were praising the efficiency of the program. For all intents and purposes, Madison should have been proud of the strides she had made. Yet, as the weeks passed, a hollow feeling began to overtake her. It wasn't that the program wasn't effective, it was. Many of the veterans had successfully reintegrated into society, building new careers, reconnecting with their families, and experiencing a sense of hope that had eluded them for years. However, this was not the whole picture. Beneath the success stories, there was a quieter, darker reality that Madison couldn't ignore. She began to see the cracks in the foundation of her work. As she spent more time with the veterans, hearing their stories, witnessing their struggles firsthand, she became painfully aware of just how much they had lost, both on the battlefield and in the years after their return. These losses were not just physical, they were deeply emotional and psychological. PTSD, survivor's guilt, and feelings of disconnection haunted many of the veterans who walked through her doors. And despite her best efforts to help them rebuild their lives, Madison realized that no job program or training seminar could fill the void left by the trauma they had experienced. The realization hit Madison hard. She had poured herself into her work, thinking that by helping the veterans find employment, she was offering them a lifeline. But what she had overlooked, what she had been too eager to ignore, was that the real work wasn't in fixing their careers, it was in fixing their souls. The veterans needed healing that went beyond what any job could provide. It was a truth that shook Madison to her core. One of the most difficult realizations was that despite her well-intentioned programs, there were still veterans who struggled to stay employed, who fell back into old habits, or who couldn't overcome their trauma, no matter how hard they tried. She had been so focused on external success that she had failed to acknowledge the internal battles that many of them were facing. For those veterans, the work was never truly over. Their scars, both seen and unseen, remained with them long after they left the program. In the wake of this realization, Madison began to question her role in the project. Had she been too ambitious? Had she taken on more than she could handle? The pressure of constantly striving to do more, to help more, to fix more, had begun to wear on her. She had always been someone who believed in getting things done, in solving problems quickly and efficiently. But now she was confronted with the hard truth that some problems, some traumas, could never be solved through quick fixes or well-meaning initiatives. The emotional weight of her work began to take its toll. At first, it was subtle, an occasional moment of doubt, a fleeting thought of whether she was truly making a difference. But soon, these moments grew longer and more frequent. She became overwhelmed by the constant demands of the program, the endless phone calls, the meetings, the reports, and the faces of the veterans who were still hurting. The guilt began to eat away at her. What more could she do? How could she possibly heal these broken individuals when even the most well-crafted programs seemed to fall short? Her relationship with her family also began to suffer. Madison had always been a dedicated worker, but now, her obsession with the program's success had consumed her. She neglected her personal life, missing family gatherings, ignoring messages from friends, and canceling plans with her husband. Her once vibrant social life had withered away, replaced by late nights in her office, buried in paperwork and progress reports. Her husband, Mark, grew increasingly frustrated with her neglect, but Madison couldn't bring herself to stop. She felt as though the veterans needed her more than her family did, and that belief drove her further away from the people she loved most. Mark, who had been supportive of her efforts from the beginning, began to express his concerns. He noticed the way Madison would come home late at night, exhausted and emotionally drained. She had stopped being the woman he had married, the woman who laughed easily, who found joy in the little things. In her place was a shell of a person, consumed by guilt, doubt, and an ever-growing sense of responsibility for the veterans she had tried to help. He knew something needed to change, but Madison was too wrapped up in her own self-imposed sense of duty to notice. She had become a martyr to her cause, but in doing so, she had sacrificed the relationships that once mattered most to her. It wasn't just her personal life that was affected. Madison's health began to deteriorate as well. Her constant stress, sleepless nights, and emotional strain took a physical toll on her body. She found herself getting sick more frequently, feeling fatigued even after a full night's sleep, and struggling with headaches and tension. She was constantly on edge, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, something that she couldn't fix no matter how hard she tried. As the program continued to grow and more veterans entered the fold, Madison realized that the emotional price she had paid was only the beginning. There would always be more to do, more veterans to help, more programs to develop, more fundraisers to organize. The burden never seemed to end, and it was beginning to feel impossible to keep up. The turning point came one evening after a particularly difficult meeting with a veteran named James, a former soldier who had been struggling with PTSD. Despite his best efforts to stay employed, James had relapsed into alcohol abuse and was no longer attending his therapy sessions. Madison had worked with him for months, trying to help him rebuild his life, but no matter what she did, James seemed to slip further away. During their meeting, he had broken down in tears, admitting that he felt completely lost, that he had nothing to live for. For the first time, Madison saw the full extent of the despair that some of the veterans were facing. She realized that she couldn't save them all. No matter how hard she tried, there would always be those who fell through the cracks. The weight of this realization crushed Madison. She had invested so much of herself into this cause, but she now understood that she couldn't carry the burden alone. Her desire to fix everything, to make the veterans' lives better, had blinded her to the fact that some things, some wounds, couldn't be fixed. As the pressure continued to mount, Madison found herself at a crossroads. She could keep pushing forward, sacrificing more of herself, her family, and her health in the hopes of making a difference. Or she could step back, reevaluate her approach, and find a way to balance her passion for helping others with the need to care for herself and her loved ones. But taking that step back felt like failure. To her, it felt like giving up on the veterans, on the cause that had become her life's work. But as Madison lay awake that night, thinking about everything she had given up, everything she had sacrificed for the cause, she realized that true success wasn't about fixing everything or saving everyone. It was about understanding the limits of what she could do, accepting that there were things beyond her control, and recognizing that taking care of herself was just as important as taking care of others. In that moment of clarity, Madison made a difficult decision. She would step back from the project. She would continue to support the veterans, but she would no longer carry the weight of their pain alone. She would seek help, both for herself and for the veterans she had worked so hard to assist. She would focus on creating a more sustainable approach to the program, one that involved a team of experts, not just her alone. The price of success had been steep, but Madison had learned something invaluable. True healing came not from fixing others, but from helping them find their own path to healing, and that, she realized, was a journey she couldn't take for them. The months that followed were a period of reflection and reevaluation for Madison. Her decision to step back from the overwhelming weight of the Veterans Program was not an easy one, but it was the first step toward a healthier, more balanced life. Her withdrawal from the intensity of the project allowed her to reconnect with the things she had neglected: her family, her health, and, most importantly, herself. As she took this step back, Madison found herself questioning not only her approach to the Veterans Program, but also the very core of her motivations. When she returned to her familiar life, it was as if she were seeing everything with new eyes. The same streets she had once driven down in a rush, constantly preoccupied with her latest meeting or event, now seemed quieter, slower. Her home, which had once felt like just a stopover between long days of work, now felt like a sanctuary. She had forgotten what it felt like to truly be present in her own life. For so long, she had been so consumed by the desire to make a difference, to create lasting change, that she had neglected the one thing that could fuel her ability to help others: her own well-being. Her husband, Mark, noticed the change immediately. Gone were the nights when Madison would come home late, exhausted and emotionally drained, consumed by guilt and anxiety. Now, when she came home, she was truly there. They would sit down together for dinner, talk about their day, laugh at little things, and simply enjoy each other's company. It wasn't that everything had returned to the way it was before. The strain of the past year had left scars on their relationship, but there was hope again. Madison was present. She was no longer just a shadow of herself, driven by the desire to prove her worth through constant achievement. She was once again the woman Mark had married, the woman who could laugh at the absurdity of life, who could find joy in the mundane. But the changes were not limited to her personal life. Madison also began to reassess her work in a way she had never done before. She still believed deeply in the importance of helping the veterans, but she had come to understand that the best way to support them wasn't through taking on all the responsibility herself. The key, she realized, was collaboration. She didn't have to do everything alone. She didn't have to be the one to fix it all. In fact, her stepping back and creating space for others was perhaps the most valuable thing she could do for the program. Madison's first step was to reconnect with her team, the people who had supported her throughout the program's early stages. She had realized just how much they had been carrying behind the scenes. They had worked tirelessly to support the veterans, to manage the logistics, and to ensure the program's success. She had been so focused on the big picture that she had failed to recognize how much she had relied on them. The team, she now saw, was made up of passionate, dedicated individuals who shared her commitment to the cause. It was time for her to lean on them, not only to provide support to the veterans, but to provide support to herself as well. In her meetings with the team, Madison made it clear that she was no longer going to shoulder the burden alone. Instead, she would be stepping into a more strategic role, one where her focus would be on overseeing the bigger picture and ensuring that the program was sustainable and scalable. She would leave the day-to-day operations to others, experts in fields like mental health, addiction recovery, and job placement, who could provide the specialized support that the veterans truly needed. At first, the shift was difficult. Madison had spent so long at the helm of the program, making decisions and taking charge, that it was hard to let go. There was a deep fear within her that if she stepped back too much, the program would falter, the veterans would suffer, and she would be seen as a failure. But over time, she began to see that her fears were unfounded. The program, under the leadership of her capable team, began to thrive in ways that it hadn't before. It was clear that by giving others the opportunity to take the lead, Madison was allowing them to flourish in their own roles, bringing fresh perspectives and new energy to the work. One of the most significant changes was the integration of mental health professionals into the program. Madison had always focused on the practical aspects of job training and employment, but she had now come to understand that the veterans' emotional and psychological well-being was just as important. She had underestimated the toll that their experiences had taken on them, and she realized that the healing process was a long, complex journey that couldn't be rushed or fixed with a job placement. With the help of her team, Madison reached out to several therapists and counselors who specialized in trauma and PTSD. They worked together to create a more holistic approach to the program, one that didn't just focus on jobs, but also on mental health support. Veterans who participated in the program were given access to therapy, support groups, and wellness programs that addressed the underlying issues that often hindered their progress. Slowly but surely, the veterans began to open up about their struggles, acknowledging their pain, and seeking the help they needed. It was a process, but it was a start. In this new phase of the program, Madison also found herself reconnecting with the veterans on a deeper level. Instead of merely being their program director, she became a partner in their healing journey. She listened to their stories without judgment, without the pressure to fix everything. She simply allowed them to be heard. It was a profound shift, one that not only helped the veterans but also helped Madison rediscover her own sense of purpose. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing she could offer was her presence, her ability to listen and empathize. But even as the program flourished and the veterans began to experience real healing, Madison knew that there would always be challenges. The road to recovery was never linear, and there would be setbacks. Not every veteran would find the success they sought, and not every effort would bear fruit. But that, too, was a part of the process. Madison had learned to accept the uncertainty, to understand that there would always be things beyond her control, and that not everything could be fixed. The work was still incredibly important to her, but she had come to understand that her role in it didn't have to be all-consuming. She had found balance, an equilibrium that allowed her to continue her work while also prioritizing her own well-being. She no longer had to prove herself through her endless work or her constant striving for perfection. She had already done enough. Her success was not measured by the number of veterans she helped or the accolades she received. It was measured by the quality of the work, the lives she touched, and the change she helped bring about. As Madison sat in her office one afternoon, looking out at the city skyline, she reflected on how far she had come. The woman who had once been driven by a need to prove herself was no longer the same. She had learned the value of vulnerability, of asking for help, and of accepting that sometimes the most profound change came not from grand gestures, but from small, everyday moments of connection. She had found a new truth, that the greatest gift she could give the veterans and herself was the freedom to heal at their own pace, without the pressure to be perfect. And as she looked out at the horizon, Madison felt a quiet sense of peace. She had returned to her familiar life, but she was no longer the person she had been before. She had grown, evolved, and learned to navigate the complexities of life, work, and healing. She had discovered that success was not about fixing everything. It was about understanding the journey, accepting the process, and embracing the beauty in the struggle. With the lessons she had learned and the changes she had made, Madison was ready to move forward. She had come full circle, but she was no longer the woman who had set out to save the world. She was the woman who had learned to embrace the world as it was, imperfect, challenging, and beautiful in its own way. And that, she realized, was enough.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.